And my background is as a boring chartered accountant, and I was just asked now, how did I get into the art world? Am I a passionate art expert? Did I, love art from the age of 3? And the answer is, I never wanted to become a chartered accountant, but my father told me that that's what I had to do, and he made all my brothers do the same, and he just said, look, you need to earn a living, and if the worst comes to the worst, you can always do the tax affairs of some little old lady, but hopefully you can go on and do something else in the business world. And then I went to work, and when I was at KPMG, I remember they said to me, we know you're not going to be working with us in the long term. And I thought, oh, am I that bad? And they said, no, because we also, they were very old-fashioned, they said, we also believe in supporting people who we think in the future might be clients of ours. And ironically, they are my auditors on some of our funds. And what they said to me, they said to me, when I was about 26, 27, they said, Philip, we've decided we're going to move you on. So, that's a lovely moment when you go and see the partners at KPMG and you say, well, what has it gone that badly? They said, we've decided you're the perfect guy to be finance director of Christie's. And I looked and I said, of what? And he said, yeah, of Christie's. And I said, I'm not interested in art. And I said, I'm not really interested in stuffy old Etonians, excuse any, I've got a lot of old Etonians who work with me. And I'm not interested in Rembrandts. And so I'm really not interested, thank you very much. And they said, no, you really ought to think about it, because we think that's the ideal opportunity for you. So I reluctantly thought, well, either I go into the world of finance at Citigroup or something like that, or I go and become finance director of Christie's. Now, it was quite an opportunistic move, because there weren't many finance directors of a major company at 27. So I was quite, and they just said, there is no interview process, you are going to be it. The old finance director will be fired and you'll be taking over. Now, it had so happened that partner had watched me when I was 23 go into a company called Maersk, which is the big shipping company you might know of. And I went in to do the audit and accounts and look at the accounts of Maersk. And one of the first things I remember going in to see was that I had to have a look at the debtors list. I was running this audit, and there was huge amounts of money owed to the company, and they didn't quite know who owed it, because there were lots and lots of little bills, and the finance director there hadn't really focused on the detail. And his main focus was having very glitzy computers with screens that could show you bar charts going up and down and all sorts of analysis on colour televisions. And he was installing these colour televisions for all his staff so that he could communicate with this sort of new technology he had. But he didn't look at the detail. And so he didn't know who owed him money. And so I came in and I said, one of the first things I said was, you've got a mess here. And he said, oh, well, something we'll just hire more staff. So I said, well, your staff don't know what they're doing, so it's just going to, just compile one mess on the other. And after about a week of doing the work, we had about 4 or 5 Pete Marwick people there. I went to the senior partner and I said, there's no more work we can do here. It's a complete waste of time. This company, at the rate they're going, is going bust. And he said, he listened to me and he said, look, I want you to meet with the chief executive of the company tomorrow morning, you and just the 3 of us. And he said, I want you to tell the chief executive what you just told me. And I was only 23, and the chief executive was, 50-something, and it was one of the world's biggest shipping companies. And this was their UK operations, and I said, you guys, I'm really sorry, but the finance director really doesn't know what he's doing. And he said, well, give me an example. It's always much better in business to give examples. I'll try and give you lots of examples today. And when I'm running out of time, you just tell me when to shut up. And I said, well, you don't know who owes you money. And I said, you've got so muddled up that when you send a statement to one of your clients to say, you owe me £48,000, he writes back and says, I don't, I owe you 27. And then the other guy, you write, say, you owe us £140,000, says, okay, I'll settle the 140,000 because he actually owes them 380,000, but he's getting, and he just says, you know, could you send me a statement to say I've now paid in full? So such a mess. Anyway, they said to me, Philip, they listened to me, and the chief executive said, okay, I've made my decision. So he said, well, what's the decision? He said, you know what the problem is, and we are going to fire the finance director tomorrow, and you are going to be hired as new finance director tomorrow. And I said, hang on a minute. It's one thing coming up with, you know, the smart answer of that's the problem, and you know, we can tell you what the problem is. Another thing is having to sort it out. And I said, hang on, this is going to take ages. And he said, look, you found the problem, you understand what the problem is, I think you're smart enough to be our new finance director. So I turned to the partner, I said, hang on, are you going to let me do this? Hoping that he would say no. He said, well, we have a much higher charge-out rate for Philip, I'm afraid, in his new finance director role than as you know, and I'm afraid it will cost, and I was listening to this, and I was saying, and he said, Philip would be delighted to take on this new appointment as of tomorrow morning. And I just sort of sank, and I thought, oh, no. Anyway, I did quite a professional job, and they said to me, and I said, I'll only do it until I sort the mess out, and then I'm not interested in shipping, and this is not, anyway, it took me 4 months to sort it out, and then I got out, I said, right, moving on. They said, would you like the permanent job? And I said, no, because I didn't want to be in that industry. And so it was because of that, and I then did it in another company, Rolls-Royce Vickers, shortly after in Switzerland, that they then said, would you like to go and sort out Christie's, because they were in a mess. And I remember the first, you wonder why the hell this is up here, but anyway, I'll come to that. So they then said, Philip, you know, you're finance director of Christie's, you've got a mess in the accounts department, how are you going to go and sit in the accounts department and sort it out? And I said, no, I'm not going to sit in the accounts department and sort it out, I'm going to go down into the business departments and find out actually what the hell this business does. So they said, well, we don't have, our finance people don't normally do that. And I said, well, you know, unless I understand what the hell we do, I haven't a clue, I can't help you on the financial side and give you advice. And he said, well, and then Christie said, well, I thought the finance director adds up the accounts. And I said, well, no, we have an accounts department that does that, but I'm here to help you make money. So he said, okay, Pete, if Pete Marwick say you're the right guy, then you do whatever you think's right. So first day I went into the dinky toy department. Now I had no idea what Christie sold. So the lesson I'm trying to introduce you to is find out about the business. When you leave graduate school or whatever, start business, go and learn as much as you can, and don't dive into the business on day one. And I went down there and I said, I went into the dinky toy department. There were 70 departments in Christie's. And I went in, and on the wall was a dinky toy, a Batman car. And I said to the guy, how much is that Batman car? And they said, well, it's £2,000. I said, that's amazing. I said, I've got one of those. I've got one at home. I said, is it really worth 2,000? And I was only earning 16,000. So it was, you know, it was a good proportion of my salary. Or maybe I was earning more than that. But anyway, anyway, they then said, you haven't got one of those. And I said, well, what do you mean I haven't? I have got exactly that. They said, but have you taken it out of the box? And I said, yeah, of course, I played with it. And they said, well, yours is used, and this is in mint condition. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's never come out of the box. I said, the poor little bastard who never took the toy out of the box. I said, he must be a miserable guy. Anyway, so I then learned that you know, it's not all, not everything's worth as much. And this was like, I was then, after a year of being finance director, they said, look, so in the first year, they said, look, we'd like you to come over and help us run Christie's Europe. and we want you to move on in the business. And so I became deputy chief executive when I was about 29. And the first thing I did was I said to the one of the accounts team, I said, bring me every single invoice in Christie's Europe. I want them on my desk on a daily basis. And they said, would you like to start at 100,000 or 200,000 or million, or what sort of level do you want to? I said, we'll start at £1. And literally, this pile of invoices arrived. And they said, when are you going to have time to look at this stuff? And I said, you know, at the end of the day, I'm gonna at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, when the phone stopped ringing, I'm gonna start looking through this. And boy, was it an insight into how Christie's was run. Because I put a pile on the left of all the invoices that seemed pretty odd, and all the invoices on the right that seemed pretty straightforward. And there was a very big pile of really odd invoices. There were taxi bills for one of our head of old masters who had a taxi waiting 6 hours outside Christie's King Street for a head of old master department who called us at 5 but decided to leave at 10. And I thought, well, hang on, why do you have when they're taxi? We were in St James's and there were taxis running up all the time, but the guy didn't like waiting for his taxi. And then there were bills for Wilton's restaurant that went on to thousands of pounds. And then there was a Concorde trip, not only Concorde for the head of Impressionist department, but for the picture that he was carrying had to have its own seat. So that was another £5,000. And when I asked them, I said, why do you have to fly on Concorde? Well, the client wanted to see it, you know, tomorrow morning. And if he didn't see it tomorrow morning, he wouldn't buy it. And, you know, it was worth. But what happened in the business is that this culture spread from the very top all the way down. So the guy who wasn't producing that much revenue said, well, I've got to go on Concorde because I've got a client who needs to see this tomorrow, and if I don't get it, and no one looked at the rationale. So there was a really interesting learning curve, is get involved in the detail early on and understand your business. So one of the things I'll tell you about, you know, and I haven't really told you what my business is yet, I'm getting to that, is get to know every aspect of your business, and don't just hire people who you say, well, I don't really understand that at all, and so I hire somebody who knows about it, and I feel, and that's a weakness, because if you don't understand what they're doing, as the guy running it, or the entrepreneur, is really dangerous when you're giving a major aspect of it to somebody else, and you've got absolutely no idea what they're doing. So in my business, I understand everybody's job that works with me, not necessarily in the same detail. And this was my first learning curve of setting up a business. So after a few years at Christie's, they said, "You're a smart guy." By the way, the thing that I didn't enjoy along the road, which is the really tough bit about running a business, was at 28, 29. I came in and said, look, the business is going downhill fast at the moment because the art market was taking a bit of a hammering. And they said, what's the answer? What are we going to do? And I said, we've got to cut costs. So they said, well, a bit like the earlier story of the accounts, they said, you've highlighted the problem, now you deliver on the cost cutting. So I said, well, you know, there's all these savings we can make left, right, and centre, but I said the biggest cost cutting is staff. Because Christie's, as an auction house, most of their overhead was staff. And they said, well, fine, you grade everybody A to D with the managing director, and then you fire everybody who's a D. And that way we'll save millions. And I said, well, we could do the grading, but who's going to do the firing? And they said, Philip, you're the deputy chief executive, you're doing the firing. And I tell you, it was the worst job I ever had to do. But and I was talking this evening with John Griffin, who lives nearby, who owns who owned Addison Lee and just sold it for 300 million. I had a cup of tea with him just now before I came over here. And I said to John, I said, I was listening to a program, or my father-in-law was listening to a program. I said, Philip, as an entrepreneur, are you a prize shit, or are you Mr. Nice Guy? And he said, I think I know the answer. Well, when I was at Christie's, I think I was the prize shit, because I had to fire all these people, which was really, really unpleasant. And the personnel department, they sort of briefed me on how to do it. And the lawyers, we had, I don't know, Stevens and Harwood or Withers come in and say, you know, you've got to do this, don't say that, don't get on. And it was really awkward. And whatever you do, you can't come out a bed of roses, because you're not building anything going up. You're just cutting costs. And actually, it was really unpleasant. I had to make people redundant who were age 60 and I was 29. And they were saying to me, Philip, do you know what you're doing to me and my family? And I remember I was so immersed in the business, and I was chasing around, and I was working 16 or 18 hours a day, that I didn't even think about it. And now, one of the reasons I set up, when I started my business, and we'll talk about that, I thought, you know, I never want to be that shit that fires people. I just want to hopefully steer people out of the business and just say, look, is it time to move on? How about thinking about, you know, what you're going to do in the next thing? Because it's human beings I'm dealing with, and I treated it when I was at Christie's as just objects that people cost money, move them in, hire them, fire them, move on. And John Griffin said to me, he said he asked some of his friends, he got some of his friends to ask the drivers in Addison Lee, you know, is the boss a shit, or is he quite a nice guy? And he said, as far as they told him, they said, apparently you're a nice guy. And in my business, I try and be a nice guy, but with a sting in the tail occasionally. But learning to handle difficult situations is really important. And he was saying to me, and I do this sometimes you go into a meeting and you're really disappointed with the results, because it's not always upward curve of great news. Sometimes you can either walk into the meeting, absolutely blow your top and say, you've messed up, you've made a huge mistake, this is a complete disaster, or you could just be silent. You could just go into the meeting and say, you know, how's it all going? And they, you know, sales rather down. They're down, 50%. You say, you just leave a silence. And it's amazing how people can read them without you lecturing them about, you mucked up, wish you'd get off your arse and do some work. But I remember going to an entrepreneurs event somewhere, and I remember meeting I've done a few speeches I did one at the Oxford Business School. And it was interesting because I had 3 big private equity houses. There was Guy Hands, who ran Terra Firma. There was the guy who ran a couple of the other massive private, they were billions. And I started my business and I was like 10 million, and they were 5 billion, 10 billion. And this guy came up to me after my speech, and he said, I'm an entrepreneur. And I said, give me your tips for how I'm going to build up my business. He said, well, I've been super smart. We've gone from A to B in no time at all. And I said, have you ever slipped up on a banana skin and lost any money? He said, never. I said, what? He said, I've never made a mistake. I've always got it right all the way. And I looked, I said, God, well. And that reminded me to talk about this, because I fucked it up with this business when I was about 32. The Christie said to me, look, you're so good at being the finance director and the deputy chief executive, you fire these people, you built the business up, you increased the turnover. Now we'd like you to launch a jewelry business with our new business that we've acquired, Spink, which was Spink were they have the royal warrants to the royal family for medals and all sorts of other stamps and coins and So they said, we want you to build, we think there's a possibility of building a jewelry department within Spink, right next to Christie's, but you go and research it, and we'll give you 6 months to research it and come back with your proposals. So I went there and I said, well, and I said, look, I think if we're going to set up a jewelry business, we ought to be in Bond Street. So he said, no, you're going to be in King Street next to Christie's because that's where we've got a spare building. So I said, right. And I said, well, if we're going to buy the jewelry, because if you're going to buy jewelry, you're going to make the most money by putting your money on the line and actually buying it advantageously. He said, no, we're not going to give you, we can't give you that much capital to buy the jewelry, so you can borrow it on consignment and then sell it and you make the profit and then eventually you'll build up. And everybody said, we'll lend you the jewelry, but at huge prices. And I said, well, you need to set up a smart showroom. And they said, well, we'll let you do a smart showroom and we'll let you spend £1 million. Anyway, just at the end of 2 years, we hadn't made a profit. I said we were in the wrong location. We underinvested in capital. We could recruit good people, but I said Christie's ought to lend their brand name to the jewelry side. And they said, no, we can't risk it. We're going to stick with Spink for the moment. And if it goes well, we'll give the Christie's brand name onto it. And so they were sort of sitting on the fence with the capital, with the location, and they just said, but we know you can make it work, Philip. Just make it work. And if it works, that's great. And I probably lost them the £2 million they put into the business. Now, because they kept on saying, well, we need profits this year. And I said, we're only year 2. And they said, well, you've had a year, so we want profits. And so when you're in a lot of shareholders and managing directors want to see, they tell you that they're in this for the long term. And they go in and say, look, we believe in you and we're behind you for the next 5 years. But most companies, their long term is about 12 to 15 months. And the really long term is maybe 2 years if you're lucky. So 2 years were up, and they were just saying, well, this is not going quite the way we'd hoped. And I said, well, we should be in Bond Street. We should take a long-term view, and we should put up the capital and so on. So I learnt about running a business, and I learned how to mess it up. And I sort of thought, oh dear, that's maybe screwed up my chances of ever being an entrepreneur. But you've got to be able to sort of bounce back. And this is coming on now to my business now. I was at Christie's at the time, and I looked at a company. There was a British Rail pension fund had invested in art, and they had in 1973 they decided to invest the equivalent of $200 million into art, and it was on the front page of every newspaper, the Sun, the News of the World. Rail Workers Pension Fund invests in Toff's art. And it was going to buy Picassos and Degas and very rare paintings. And in fact, it made 13% return a year from 1974 to 1987. And Sotheby's, our competitor, was handling all the acquisitions and all the sales of the art of this pension fund. And I said, why can't Christie's do this? So this sort of, and I was saying to the heads of department of Christie's, go and get for sale the things that are in the British Rail Pension Fund, and we should be selling them. And they said, no, we can't get a look in because Sotheby's have the mandate. So I went to the board of Christie and said, look, we've got to go and start our own fund to compete, and then we'll create our own business, and we'll generate, and they said, and Lord Carrington at the time was my chairman, and he said, too many conflicts of interest, we shouldn't do this. So I got all the way down the line of doing a business proposal, a business plan. And it was funny because a guy called me who was actually at Arthur Andersen in those days, a tax advisor. And he'd come in and he was advising a major client, and I got on really well with him. And he said, Philip, have you thought about how much money do people make out of art? And I said, well, I've got this client who bought this for 50,000, sold it for 2 million. And he said, there must be something there that you could create like a traded fund. And so actually he helped me. And I said, well, look, and he'd been an entrepreneur. He went on to be a very successful entrepreneur in his own right. But he had the idea. He said, but Philip, you are the guy who can make it happen. So I'm not going to stand up here and say it was all my idea. I'm Mr. Smart, guy. It was other people sort of came with the idea. The entrepreneurial thing is hearing an idea, listening to it, and then deciding that you're going to implement it. And one of the reasons I put this up here was that when I started my business, one of the things I learnt was when you're running a business, you always get hounded by the press. And because I'm in the art business, I get hounded by the press all the time. And my chief executive at Christie's always made it a point of talking to the press himself, not giving it to his PR department, especially the main press. And I was at a party at Sotheby's after I launched my business, and I'll give you 30 seconds of what my business is now to finally. I set up, or tried to set up back in 2001, 2, 3, and I'll come to that, the first fine art fund. I remember going to friends and family, and I said, I'm going to set this up. And one of my entrepreneurial friends said, whatever you do, don't take any money from friends and family. And I said, but they'll give me some money. They said, that doesn't justify your business. They'll do it because they feel sorry for you, or they want to help you, or your parents want to be nice. So you could talk to them get them to support you in the idea, and be morally behind you and say, look, be all that, but to help you, but don't take any money from them. In any case, if you do, either they'll claim that it was them that helped you all the way, and then you'll never get the credit, and it'd be a nightmare. So don't take money from family. And I remember one of my entrepreneurs said, look, if you get some seed investors who are smart to back you, then you'll probably make the business work, because they'll see something that you might not see. And why did I put up the Telegraph? Once I launched my business of being the Fine Art Fund, but I hadn't raised any money, and I'll talk about raising the money and so on. One of the lead writer for the Telegraph came up to me and said, I've heard from a friend of mine at Sotheby's that you're about to launch a $300 million art fund, and it's going to buy $50 million paintings, and it's going to do all this and that, and you've got the first 100 million lined up and so on. And I said, I'm really sorry, but I can't talk about it. And he said, are you going to be like that? And I said, I'm sorry, I've got no comment. He said, well, if you've got no comment, I'll write what I feel like writing. And he said, 300 million, 100 million seed investor, you're going to be buying $50 million pictures, you haven't got any experts, and you're going to, you're an accountant. So I said, hang on a minute, before you write this, then I better sit down with you, and I'll give you the brief, but can we work it through so you don't screw it all up at the beginning. So it's quite important, because the press love getting hold of the story. And the other issue I've learned with the press is if you Google Philip Hoffman of the Fine Art Fund, there are thousands and thousands of articles about what we do. And to some extent, they've helped build me up. They've always said, Hoffman wins this or does this or something. But boy, do I know that when I screw it up, and I will screw it up somewhere down the line, and I probably have screwed it, they'll come down on me like a ton of bricks, twit, Hoffman loses or whatever. And they're waiting to do that. So you've got the press who come and build you up, and then they're probably not, I don't know if there are any audience here, press probably are, but I love them really. So I started the business. It took me 3 months to get the seed capital. And they said, how much money do you need? I said, I need £1.25 million to start off. And they said, how much are you putting in? So I said, sorry. They said, well, how much are you personally putting in? I said, I'm putting in my time. So they looked at me and they said, and what do you expect? And I said, well, I'd like 51% of the company, and I'd like a salary of £150,000 a year. And they said, so starting when? So I said, well, starting from today, actually, from now. So he said, all right, so you're like 51% of the company, you're putting zero money in, and you want £150,000 salary. So I said, yes, that's the deal. Now, ironic, now, someone said, you don't earn a penny for the first few years. You've got to put in, all your money. You've got to, how much is your house worth? Let's say, my house was worth, say, £500,000 at the time. They said, we expect you to mortgage your house up to the hilt, and we want your neck on the line. So I thought, one of my entrepreneurial friends, you can look him up, he's a guy called Martin Myerscough, and he started a number of businesses, and he now runs a company called Green Bottle, but he's built up all sorts of different businesses. And he's a really lively northern. He said, Philip, you just stick with what you want. You tell them where to go. If they don't want to put their money with you, then they can. As the guy Addison Lee said to, I think he said to ITN. He told me this evening. He said ITN was their biggest account, and they were real shits with him when he was at Addison Lee. And they said, we want to see you. We want to reduce the price this year because we're paying too much. We use your cars all the time. And they said, now we want 20% less this year. And he said, you know what you can do with your 20% less? You can stick it up your arse. And he said, you won't believe I said that. And he said, it's about the only time I've been rude or a shit on return. But that was what Martin said to me. He said, stick with your belief and just go for it. And if they don't want to invest because they, got another idea, then walk away. Anyway, I got one of the first guys I went to. I can tell you some of the names who backed me because I'm allowed to. I'm not allowed to tell you a lot of the investors because I'll fast forward in a minute and tell you who are some investors. But I got one of my first investors was Lord Hanson, and I met him through an introduction, and he asked to see me for lunch. Now, Lord Hanson was Mrs. Thatcher's favourite entrepreneur in the 80s, and he said, "I'd like to see you, and I'd like to have lunch with you." Probably because I'd been at Christie's or something, that I had the chance to get into that door. But when I was at this stage of starting my business, I was 39. So I went to see Lord Hanson, and Hanson said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to invest. I'm going to set up a fund that invests in art." And he said, "That's an interesting idea." He said, "Funnily enough, when I was about 20 or 30 years ago," he said, "I had some spare money, and I bought my house in Eaton Square, and I needed some pictures. So I went into a gallery that I knew, and I said, 'Here's 5,000. Come round, have a look at my house.' And this was in the 50s or 60s. 'Come and have a look at my house and fill it with art.'" And he said, "I came back from a trip, and I think he ran British American Tobacco, was one of the companies, along with Hanson Industries and a number of others. He came back and he said, 'I found 3 pictures in my house.' And he said, 'I went ballistic with the art dealer.' And I said, 'What the hell are you doing? I told you to fill the house with pictures and you bought 3 pictures.' And he said, 'Over there is a Monet, that's a Modigliani, and that's Picasso.' And he said, 'I never heard of them, and they look like shit.' And he said, and you spent £5,000 of my money on 3 pictures. I told you," he said, "trust me, buying the best is worth it because it'll go up in the long run." And he said, "You know what? I sold that Monet for 3 million. I sold the Modigliani for 5 million. So he said, I believe in what you're telling me, art as investment. But he said, it's one thing, the idea, But the second thing is the manager, the guy who's going to run it. Because if I don't believe in the person who's going to run it, I'm not interested in the idea. It's a waste of time. So he said, I've listened to you, I've checked you out, and I'll give you £250,000 as one of your seed investors on the terms you've asked for. But I had to dilute my terms. I think I ended up with 40% of the company. I couldn't have 51, but I agreed to be, they didn't make me put my house on the line. I got a salary, 150,000, quite a long time ago. And they said, because some of them said, we don't want you to sweat. What we're interested in is you've got a reputation, and we believe you're not going to walk away from this and leave us high and dry. And therefore, we think if you are a man of your word and honor and actually going to get on, you're going to stick with it, even if it doesn't quite go to plan. Now, that's why I'm looking at the screen, because I got Lord Hanson to back me first, and I got the Rousing family, who are in Tetra Pak, to be my next backer. And then I got another chap who you might know in the press, Charles Wiggoder, who runs Utility Warehouse. You might have seen him in the press. Just bought a company for $250 million last week or 2 weeks ago. And they were some of the people who backed me. And then I remember in my year, at the end of year one, it was all going really well, got the money, paying myself, quite enjoying it, putting the business plan together, no rush, because I could afford to do it properly. And at the end of year one, one of the big banks, Dresdner Klein Wasserstein, said, we like your idea. So I said, great, thank you very much. I'm glad you endorsed that. We're gonna raise 200 million to do an art fund. So I said, that's great. But we're going to do it ourselves in competition with you. How much money have you got? I said, well, I'm just starting out. I said, well, there you are. They said, we could either be against you or we could be with you. So I said, well, what's the deal? And they said, we want 51% of your company and you can have 49%. And so I thought, so having left Christie's to set up the Fine Art Fund and having set up my own business and started it, suddenly I was sort of an employee of a big bank. And I thought it would all be very easy. Boy, was it a nightmare. Within a few months, because they then said, we'll put in some more money and help you build it. But they said, look, if you do it, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be run professionally. So they checked everything, double-checked and query everything. It was a nightmare. Anyway, luckily I got out of it, and I'm running out of time, so I want to fast forward. I'm not going to tell you all the stories. But this was an amusing one where I met this $1 billion family in Miami. His brother started Studio 54 in New York. And Don Rubel and Mara Rubel were on a panel with me. And I was sitting next to Mara Rubel. They're big collectors. The Miami Art Fair is going on right now. A lot of my team are over there. And I was sitting next to Mara Rubel, and she said, what do you, Philip, we had a panel in Vienna, and she said, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm on the panel talking about investing in art. And she said, what? I said, well, I'm talking about investing in art. And I said, well, what do you do? And she said, well, I'm a collector. And she said, did I hear you correctly? That you invest in, what do you do? And I said, run an art fund. She suddenly stopped. She turned to her husband across the table and said, do you know what this arsehole does? And I said, sorry. She said, darling, do you know what this arsehole, he runs an art fund. And everybody stopped round the table when Mara Rubel was saying, no, this guy, and I said, well, I'm really sorry, don't. And the lunch didn't go very well. And I was then on the panel with these guys, with Don and Mara and Christie's and Sotheby's, and somebody in the audience really messed things up because they said, could I ask all of the panel if they'd invest in Philip's art fund? And I thought, oh no, what a... So Mara Rubel gets up and says, over my dead body, would I ever invest in a fucking art fund? And then they turned to Don, and Don stood up and said, you know what? I think Philip's quite a smart guy, and I probably would invest in his art fund. And then there was this huge argument between husband and wife on the stage in front of 200 people and the press about, and they said, well, we've been married 40 years. I've never heard my husband disagree with me. I can't believe he's going to invest in a bloody art fund. It's ridiculous. So I then thought, I really had enough of today. And at the dinner, there was a party in the evening. I thought, I'll let my hair down, go to the party. And there, who was there? Dawn and Mara Bell again. I thought, oh God, and she came out, she came heading towards me. I thought, I'll go in the other direction. She comes over and she gives me a huge hug. And she says, you know what? I hate the sin, but I love the sinner. And ever since then, we're really great friends. I see them all over the world. We talk about investing and what opportunities there are and all the rest of it. And I'll skip on. One of the things I learned, not everything goes up in the art world. I can touch on that. I'm not going to tell you. There are lots and lots of crazy stories I can tell you about the art market. But I'm going to fast forward to some of the issues in building our business. I remember one of the guys I got to back me was a guy called, who I can use his name, a guy called John Muse of Hicks Muse Taken First. They were the guys who owned Jimmy Choo, and they owned, I don't know, tons of other businesses. And John listened to me. I met him over dinner, and he listened to me, and he said, I'll back that idea. He said, it's a bit risky. You don't have any track record. Now, and he said, I'll back the idea. And he said, how long is this fund for? And I said, 10 years. He said, please, if I back you, please don't wait 10 years to produce a performance. Could we, try and get some performance early on? And this was one of my first big deals. I set up my art fund, and I read on the board there was the Scream earlier on, which was my second year, because it took me 3 years to get my business going. So I highlighted the Spink business. 2 years we gave up out. I stuck it out. I had the capital from all these different people, stick it out for 3 years. And I had nothing to show at the end of 2 years except optimism. At the end of year 3, my business plan said, you've got to raise 100 million. I'd raised 13 million. John Muse was one of the investors who backed me. And this is one of the pictures I bought. And I bought it early on, and I'd never heard of the artist. But what I did have is I brought in a team of people to work with me, and just to fast forward, I started with 2 people. I now have 45 people involved in my business. We bought this picture. I'd never heard of it, but a guy called Peter Doig, but my experts backed it. They put their money in with me in the fund. We sold it 12 months later. The top lot at Sotheby's, we bought it for 880,000. We sold it for 1.8 million. So we made 1 million in 12 months. And one of my investors had been a co-investor in that, so he made 100% return on his money. So suddenly, a few more investors started looking at it. Now, this is what's happened in the business. I mean, Charles Saatchi, in a sense, was an art fund. I mean, he's in the headlines all the time at the moment, but in a sense, he owned the stuffed shark. He bought it 50,000, sold it for 12 million to Steve Cohen, who's also in the headlines because SAC had a slight problem recently. I'm not going to talk about some of the pitfalls because we won't have all the time, but there are lots of other stories, and this was a brief one of, in the art, I'm now in a business, high-end business. What does the art fund do? It buys rare art from, now I started with 13 million, now we're heading towards 300 million. No debt. I don't have debt in my management company. I don't have debt in my fund. I don't owe anybody any money. And I'm very careful. I look at the detail. I know what everybody's doing in my business. But here's how to lose money. If you don't insure properly, Steve Wynn, the casino owner, owned this picture. And he sold it to Steve Cohen at SAC for 130 million, world record price. And he had a party at the top of the Wynn Tower. And he took one of his guests to say that, and Steve Wynn's partially blind. He said, I want to show you the picture, come over this way. And he turned around, he couldn't see where the picture was, and he put his elbow straight through the middle of it. And that was the biggest insurance payout luckily he was insured, but it was the biggest insurance payout. But it was a nightmare. They were negotiating for years on what the payout was. I have an insurance policy to avoid that type of issue. So lots of lessons you learn. Now the high watermark for a work of art is 250 million. I'm buying art now. I represent clients, just to show you the map of my first client, my first meeting. I did about 400 meetings. I went to Madrid thinking this is the 401st meeting and this is going to be a bloody bore. And I turned up, I walked into the 401st meeting, into this family office, never heard of them, and I was sort of a bit casual this time. And I thought, well, I went in and they said, could I tell you all about my art fund? I said, yes. And after about 10 minutes, they said, thank you very much. So I said, is that it? And they said, yes, thank you very much. We've made our decision. So then the girl next to me, who's with me, I just said, well, why don't you ask what the decision is? So I said, well, so what is the decision? And I was sort of ready to sort of walk out. They said, well, would you accept $10 million? I said, what? So lesson number one, go in and you never know who's going to take you seriously. And the ones that are sure bets aren't sure bets, and the ones that you don't think are sure bets end up, and I went to the next meeting straight after, and I walked into the meeting and I said, will you take 10 million? So I got 20 million after 3 years of zero in 2 meetings in Madrid. Now, I have clients in 23 countries from Latin America, Asia, Middle East. I haven't yet hit Greenland. I tend to choose business places to do business where I enjoy traveling, because I have to do a hell of a lot of travel. So I'm not a big fan of some of these countries. I mean, Mongolia, haven't been there yet. So this is a bit of a summary, but quite a sad summary, because I had dinner with this chap, Nigel Doughty, who set up a Doughty Hanson $10 billion private equity company. And he said to me at dinner, he said, Philip, I envy you. He said, it's the journey that's fun, not necessarily the getting there. He said, I've got there. He made hundreds of millions of pounds. He said, you're still enjoying the journey. He died 7 days later. And it taught me a lesson. One of the lessons is enjoy what you're doing and enjoy the journey. Don't, getting there isn't the end goal. It's that journey. And just to summarize, how did I get there? I had a vision. I've talked about a little bit. I've tried to illustrate it. I've had perseverance, 3 years, zero. Suddenly you get a lucky streak. The ability to execute, creating a track record. That Peter Doig I just showed you was the example. We've sold now $100 million of art. I managed 250 million. We just signed a new account for 100 million. We represent 120 families, 18 of the world's top 1,000 families. They like the track record. I got the seed capital, but not from those who love you. I've had thousands of meetings. God knows how many times I've had to say the same bloody thing. Timeline management. Have I arrived? I hope not. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got time for a couple of questions only before we break out the booze. So who wants to get us going? Is it? You gave me the mic.
Sorry, my bad.
It's winking at me.
The bottom, the lower button. Yeah.
Is it on now?
Yeah.
It's on now. Great, thank you. And can you please wait till you get the mic before you ask the question, otherwise you won't be recorded.
Thank you for the informative talk. I work with a few hedge funds, and some of them are investing in stuff like wine and other alternatives, to the point where they're investing in vineyards that are going to produce wine later on. Have you ever considered investing in artists before they've actually become famous or become...
Yes, I have. And in fact, we're just starting a young contemporary sort of product where but what we term young artists, I mean artists at the sort of $5,000 to $50,000 range. The average ticket of what I buy now is $1 million to $5 million. I'm in the middle of a deal at 20 million. I own pictures at 40 million. The biggest picture will probably be involved. It will be 100 million, 150 million. So it's massive, massive numbers. But at the other end, a lot of clients, I was in the Middle East, and they said, look, we'd like to start working with you, but we haven't got the millions to go in, because our minimum ticket now, when I started, my minimum ticket was 250,000. I've moved it up. My minimum ticket's now $1 million before they can invest with me. And some of our private accounts are $3-5 million minimum. But we decided just to do a sort of diffusion line and start with some of the younger contemporary and build little $300,000 accounts of young contemporary artists. So we're putting that together. So we are doing it, but it is more time consuming than buying a picture for $1 million or $2 million.
Question. The question in the back there. Yeah.
I'm going to stick around for the free drinks afterwards, so anybody wants to nobble me. Well, I hope they're free. I didn't check.
Thanks for your talk. 2 quick questions. How long do you lock up the capital of your investors, and what percentage of your assets are in managed accounts?
Well, when I started, the first fund we started was a 10-year fund with 3 one-year extensions, and everybody said you'll never raise a 10-year fund, and I bloody did it. And then I did a second one, and then the third one, the markets were changing in 07, 08, of course, was terrible years, and I think I did my third fund in 09, and everybody said I don't want to lock up for 10 years. So I shrank that fund down to 5 plus 3, and then we brought on the managed accounts, because people said I don't want to invest, commingle with others, I want my own private account. So now our private accounts have absolutely mushroomed. Our long-only funds have been difficult to raise, although I'm in negotiations with some major institutions who now want to say, look, we'll put away 100, 200, 500 million into art as a long-term investment or pension fund type, which I think is really interesting. But I then recently created a new fund, which is 2 years, and it's a sort of, it's a very, very niche product. But as an entrepreneur, I was the first guy to set up a long-only fund in art, apart from the British Rail Pension Fund. I then was the first guy to set up these sort of private accounts and trade them. And then I'm the first guy to set up a very new fund. And I'm always looking to push the boundaries and come up with new ideas. And I've raised, I think I raised 70 million in the last 8 weeks for my new fund, and we're on target to get to 100. And everybody say, no one's raising any money right now. So you have to pick your niche and see opportunity, and don't slog something that's really difficult. At the moment, to sell the 10-year fund is bloody impossible. Unless I don't know, there's certain people that can, but I'm not.
Question. Yeah. And him. Well, lots of hands are going up. We're not going to have time for everybody, I'm afraid. But you will be around.
I will be, drinking heavily. The only bad news, I've got to get up at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. I spent my life on airplane. I've got to go to Milan first thing tomorrow, which is a bit depressing, but I could just leave from here.
Make sure you haven't got a hand.
Yeah.
For any private equity or funds of any sorts, valuation due diligence is one of the key levers to generate returns. Can you, how do you identify entry price points and valuation at exit of the
I mean, there's a whole subject in itself, and I didn't really, I didn't go in talking about there was one side I could talk about art and asset class and investing in art. The other is talking about being an entrepreneur, setting up the business. I don't want to go. I'd rather go through that outside this, because it's a whole subject on its own, and that's what we've built up is a whole team of experts and due diligence and spotting the opportunities of making money. But that is an hour's conversation on its own. But I'll give you that afterwards.
Take some questions over this side.
Hello. How do you structure your fees, and what is the ideal size for an art fund?
So my fees are 2 and 20 with a hurdle of 6, and they're mostly private equity funds, longer. There'd be huge pressure on fund managers to reduce those fees down to 1 or half or whatever, and we are entrepreneurial on our private accounts, and so where we look at other ways of charging, very much success orientated. Some things I'll just do it based on a share of the upside. We put our own money into the deals. So we'll make more money out of the upside than we do. The fees are just cover the operating costs. So 2 and 20, is the main driving, but we're under huge pressure from people saying we're not paying fees and how are you charging them. So I think that's answered one of your questions.
And the size?
The size, minimum size 20. I think the minimum size got to be $20 million. Small, but I think it should be 100 million or 200 million. But if you want to be an entrepreneur and get going, you can start with 20.
Is it a percentage of the market you're targeting?
No, well, I try not to be more than 5% of the market in terms of maximum size. I mean, JP Morgan said to me, could we do $2 billion with you? And I said, no. And they said, well, then we can't talk to you.
Entrepreneur always tries to get 3 questions to one, doesn't he? So, one more, please.
Is it possible to short the ARC market? And if so, how do you go about it? Or are you just long only across the board?
Very smart hedge fund managers tried to do it and they lost all their capital. £10 million went down the plug hole. They came up with fancy ideas of how you could do it. You cannot short. They tried to short it using Sotheby's stocks and other vehicles to short against the ARC. They didn't really know what they're doing and they really screwed up. They lost all their capital, which was £10 million.
One last question in the middle here somewhere. Someone got a question in the middle? You can take a bit, Cash.
Pleasure. Vivian Liu, got a last chance. So I'm kind of curious to understand your vision because you listed on the top. So what's your vision of the finite fund going forward in future? Because compared to other private equity funds who develop themselves, become a big platform, cover different products. For example, like Blackstone, they get listed, whereas some other smaller PE funds will be focused on whatever they do, keep the small and niche player. So what's your vision of finite fund going forward?
My goal was to get, my first goal was to get to about 300 million. I've done that, and my next goal is to get to $1 billion. I don't know why. I want to be global. I don't know why. I get on a plane I'm in one of British Airways' best clients. Why do I want to do it? I just want the challenge. I'm not interested in the money. I deal with the richest guys in the world. I deal with people worth 20 billion to, only 50 million. But I see how they live their life, and I'm not interested in all the accompaniments that go with all that money. I'm just interested in building an interesting business, having fun. My philosophy in my business, and I instill this in my team, is everything we do has got to be professional, everything we do has got to be enjoyable, and everything's got to be profitable. So I add professional, profitable, and fun. And with clients, I do the same. If I'm going to deal with a client, it's got to be professional, profitable, and fun. And I said, it's a private business. I don't work for anybody else. And if it doesn't tick all 3 boxes, I'm not doing it. And that's the ingrained message to my team. That's what I tell my clients, and that's how I run my life. So I'm trying to make all those 3 things build a global business. We're halfway around the globe. We're 23 countries. Maybe we'll make it 46 countries. And we're having some fun. It is quite tough at times. 70% of the time is fun. 30% of the time it's pretty awful. Thank you very much.
Philip, thank you very much.